Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we plunge right into your source material, pull out the most important insights, really, and give you that shortcut to being genuinely well-informed.
Hmm.
Today, we're embarking on, well, a really fascinating journey. We've got this incredibly rich, kind of eclectic collection of sources.
Yeah, it's quite a mix.
It is. We're talking ancient symbols, sweeping philosophical theories, even some, like, remarkably sharp predictions about our world right now, a real tapestry.
Indeed. And what makes this deep dive, I think, particularly unique is how much of the material, and this is key, while it feels so relevant today, it actually draws on concepts, observations that are surprisingly old.
Old how?
Well, some ideas go back centuries, others even millennia. It's really a testament, to how these enduring ideas, this old wisdom, can shed light on the problems we're facing right now.
That's a great way to put it. So our goal today is basically to unpack these diverse sources, find those core nuggets, and maybe connect some dots you haven't seen before.
Sound good?
So let's dig into the first piece. Let's kick things off with a symbol. It might feel really modern to a lot of people, almost, stark, but it actually has incredibly ancient, deep roots. We're talking about the letter Z.
The Z, yes.
Our sources really delve into its surprising history. They trace it back to the Algeiz rune and Germanic traditions, and eel, or eolize in Old English. And this is where it gets really interesting, for me anyway. Eolize actually means spark.
A spark. Yeah, what's truly fascinating here is how this single symbol, it pops up across different languages, different cultures, but it carries these profound and actually quite consistent meanings.
Like what?
Well, in both Germanic and older Russian contexts that the sources mention, the Z signifies protection, defense. It stems from these ancient runes that seem to share this common spiritual core.
Protection and defense. Okay.
But esoterically, it's also seen as a symbol for the soul, or maybe more accurately, the soul's journey.
Right.
And the sources highlight that this spark idea isn't just like poetic license. It points to an actual electrical spark,
Wow.
which suggests a very, very old understanding of life's fundamental nature, its energy. And just to give you a sense of how old we're talking, the material notes this symbol even shows up in ancient Tartarian paintings.
Tartarian. Now, that's a term you hear in these kinds of, let's say, alternative history circles, right? A hypothesized lost civilization.
Exactly. And in those depictions, according to the source, the Z is often shown ringed, almost suggesting, electrical circuits or fields.
So these ideas, they really go way, way back, a continuity of understanding, maybe.
Precisely.
And the spark, it's not just a fleeting thing, is it? Not just a momentary ignition.
No, not at all.
The deep dive connects it really profoundly to the concept of the soul itself as a carrier and protector of this divine spark of life. So the source explains the soul isn't static. It functions as this evolving protective vehicle or a vibrational shell.
Right. It gathers experience.
Exactly. It's described as aggregating huge amounts of life experience, spanning what the source provocatively calls millions of lives.
Millions of lives.
Yeah.
That's a big concept. Reincarnation, essentially.
Pretty much. Through this continuous journey, the soul becomes this divine drop of intuition that carries forward into new incarnations. So yeah, this idea of reincarnation, continuous progression, it's absolutely central to how the source interprets it.
Interesting.
And the Z is even presented as a symbol for karma, too, representing life's path, which is often, irregular, not linear, but still deeply interconnected.
That is deep. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? How do these ancient, almost mystical concepts, how do they actually show up in our very materialistic, very practical, modern world?
Well, the sources point directly to something contemporary.
Okay.
The use of the Z symbol right now. You see it on Russian tanks, on troops.
Ah, yes. That's been very visible.
Suggesting a modern, practical, highly visible application of this ancient symbol of protection and defense.
Right. It's a really stark reminder, isn't it? That old knowledge, maybe even old symbols, perhaps with new layers of meaning piled on, or even attempts to manipulate that meaning. They can persist, they can find expression in incredibly unexpected ways, centuries after they first appeared. It does make you question whether symbols carry some kind of inherent power, regardless of how we understand them today.
It really does. Okay, so moving from ancient symbols to something even, well, grander in scope, a cosmic philosophy.
Right.
Our sources propose a theory of everything. Bold claim. Aiming to answer that huge question, why?
The ultimate question.
And the core premise is pretty bold, almost provocative. It says, consciousness, being all-pervasive, knowing everything, eventually gets bored.
Bored. Okay, hang on.
Yeah. Now, the source emphasizes this isn't just some, whimsical New Age idea. It actually draws on much older philosophical patterns. Think, as above, so below.
Ah, okay, that resonates.
Yeah.
Suggesting a mirroring between the cosmic and the individual.
Exactly.
Right. So connecting that to the bigger picture, the source posits that the entire material universe, it calls it materium, wasn't just sort of unfolding naturally. It was created as a deliberate experiment.
An experiment for what?
To generate novelty, the shock of the new, something completely unpredictable, even to an all-knowing consciousness.
So the universe exists to surprise God, essentially.
In a manner of speaking, yes.
Yeah.
And this universe is described as flickering into and out of existence. Wait for it. 22 trillion times a second.
22 trillion. I can't even picture that.
It's almost incomprehensible. Driven by a fundamental pulse, like flicking a light switch on and off so fast, reality just seems continuous.
Okay.
The source suggests this pulse is the constant beat of creation, constantly generating that novelty through its relentless reforming. It flips our whole understanding, doesn't it? Creation isn't about reaching some static perfection.
No, it's about the thrill of the unknown. It gives a why that a lot of other theories maybe leave out.
Precisely.
And that constant flickering, that dizzying speed, it's not just some abstract footnote in the theory, is it?
No, it's fundamental. The source says it's what creates temporal pressure and novelty potential.
Temporal pressure.
The very manifestation of matter itself, according to this, is a direct product of those two forces.
Wow. And it's not just physics. It connects to us.
Directly. The source connects it straight to human experience. It says, and I quote loosely, "You must have emotion in order that novelty might be existent with potential."
So our feelings, our messy human emotions, they're part of this cosmic experiment.
That's the idea. Our chaos, our complexity, it's all feeding into this grand experiment to create unpredictability. It's quite profound, thinking our inner world helps fulfill the universe's core purpose.
It really is.
And the theory goes further. It suggests we can access something it calls hyperspace.
Hyperspace, like in sci-fi.
Not quite like a distant galaxy, it's described more like a permeable boundary, a life-death barrier, or a thin layer between life and death.
Okay, so more like a state of being.
Exactly, a state of expanded awareness. Through experiences like the source mentions psychedelic drugs specifically, you can potentially tap into higher consciousness, interact with other beings. It's about perceiving beyond our normal senses. And what's really thought-provoking is the idea that novelty is the currency of hyperspace.
The currency, meaning what?
Meaning new ideas, creative thought, original experiences. That's the ultimate value in this broader reality.
So our creativity, our search for new things, it's not just for us.
It becomes something much larger than just personal game, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It even suggests our own minds might be trans-time, able to perceive bits of the future forming, blurring those lines of reality we hold so dear.
Trans time. Wow. Okay, let's bring this down to earth a bit.
Good idea. Ground ourselves.
To practical, real-world decision-making. Our sources introduce this really potent concept called energy calculus.
Ah, yes. Developed by some brilliant minds back in the 1920s, Buckminster Fuller, Vladimir Vernadsky.
Right. So this is genuinely old thinking, but wow, is it relevant now? It's described as less about math formulas and more about a meticulous art of thinking, applying intelligence to complex situations.
It is. It's a mindset, and it brings up a really vital question for anyone making big decisions. Is this goal actually worth doing?
Worth doing in terms of energy.
Exactly. The energy calculus isn't about, complex equations. It's about a deeply granular analysis of all the energy spent throughout an entire process, start to finish.
All the energy, you mean?
Everything. From digging raw materials out of the ground to transporting them, manufacturing the final product, using it, and even disposing of it. Every single step.
Okay, that's comprehensive.
It forces you to look at every state change, every transport chain, all the little drops in a production line that add up. The source suggests taking an alien invader perspective.
Alien invader?
Yeah, like you arrive with zero assumptions, and you have to account for every atom, every joule of energy, every single step needed from absolute scratch. It's about seeing all the hidden, invisible costs.
That makes sense. And the deep dive gives an example, right?
A very compelling one.
Yeah.
The big global push for electric vehicles powered by lithium batteries.
Ah, okay. Relevant?
Very. The source applies this energy calculus rigorously. It argues that if you truly account for all the side chains, and this is where the detail is incredible,
Go on.
you have to factor in the huge energy cost of mining the lithium and cobalt. The massive transportation networks needed to move these materials globally. The energy to build the giant trucks, doing the transporting. The diesel needed to fuel those trucks.
Right. It keeps branching out.
Exactly. Then there's building the charging infrastructure, the energy the grid itself consumes to deliver the charge, and then, crucially, the very complex, energy-intensive process of disposing or recycling those batteries at the end of their life.
Okay, when you lay it all out like that.
When you actually account for all of it, the source concludes there simply aren't enough easily accessible resources, lithium, cobalt, other rare earths, to achieve a full societal shift to EVs. At least none of the aggressive timelines everyone's talking about.
That's a powerful argument, almost unsettling, challenging a goal that seems so positive on the surface.
It is. And it really shows the power of this old-school, rigorous way of thinking.
Yeah, what's fascinating is how these older frameworks, Fuller's, Vernadsky's, provide this incredibly rigorous, holistic way to analyze feasibility, an approach that, kind of ironically, often gets overlooked today. Modern policymaking sometimes focuses too much on just the direct costs, the immediate impacts, maybe.
I think that's fair to say. And the source is pretty blunt. It concludes that such an all-encompassing goal, when you run the full energy calculus, is effectively doomed to failure.
Doomed. Why?
Because the total energy cost of production and the whole life cycle, when you really add it all up, vastly outweighs any perceived energy benefit compared to alternatives over that same life cycle.
So it's a net energy loss, basically.
According to this analysis, yes. It's a stark demonstration of how seemingly simple goals can be astronomically complex, maybe even unachievable, when you look at them through this truly holistic old-school lens.
It really highlights that sometimes the best tools for understanding complex systems, they've been around for decades, just waiting to be picked up again.
Well said.
Okay, let's pivot again to the nature of time itself.
Another light topic.
Right. Our sources present this really interesting perspective. The past is constantly vanishing, like footprints being washed away by the tide.
Disappearing.
And the future.
Yeah.
It's described as an unformed yet forming, quote, maelstrom of chaos.
Chaos. Sounds about right sometimes.
Doesn't it? So what's stable? What's actually tangible and accessible, according to this material? It's the ever-present now.
The now.
But this now isn't just a fleeting moment.
Yeah.
It's presented as our perception of the very pulse of time, that fundamental beat of reality we talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But if our minds are potentially trans-time, like the source suggested,
Right, able to perceive bits of the future forming.
then it kind of stands to reason this material might offer some pretty specific, maybe striking predictions about what's coming, all right, about imminent societal shifts.
That's a critical bridge, yeah. If consciousness exists, in a sense, on both sides of that now, how do we carry things across? Thoughts, ideas, intuitions into that forming future. The source suggests ideas can be made time-stable. Not just by, the obvious way, writing them down on paper,
Okay.
but even by consciously putting it outside of time in your own consciousness, holding the idea steady in a way.
Outside of time.
Yeah, and this is where the source connects it back to things like psychic abilities. It suggests our minds are trans-time, perceiving the formation of future elements, even if it's often just murky, intuitive feelings. It definitely challenges our usual linear understanding of time.
It certainly does. Okay, so applying these big, almost cosmic ideas to right now, our current reality, the sources make some very specific, very striking predictions about imminent societal shifts. And maybe it's important here just to reiterate.
Yes.
We're presenting the information, the terminology, exactly as it appears in the material you provided us. We're not endorsing or validating these specific claims or viewpoints ourselves.
Absolutely. Just reporting the content of the sources.
Right. So the sources posit we're entering a period of pretty significant economic upheaval, impending bank failures, the dollar's purchasing power plummeting potentially towards near zero. They describe a hyperinflationary environment.
Hyperinflation.
And they draw a direct parallel to Germany's Weimar Republic in 1923, a very specific historical echo exactly a century later.
Wow, okay. That's a stark comparison. And how does the material explain this? What's the narrative?
It describes these coming changes as a denialment, an end to what the source itself labels as a scripted play.
A scripted play. By whom?
Orchestrated by entities it specifically describes as the Khazarian Mafia and the Deep State. Now, according to this material, these groups have sought centralized control going way back, like 1905.
Right.
And the source claims they've influenced, even polluted academia and science to fit their agendas.
Okay, so a conspiracy narrative, essentially.
That's the framing in the source, yes.
Yeah.
And it posits that this centralized methodology is now failing. Why? Because of, quote, too many humans and an ongoing great awakening.
Too many humans, meaning ungovernable complexity.
Seems to be the implication, leading to widespread revolts, riots. It even draws parallels to recent events in China under its centralized system, as observed in the source material. It's a very specific and, yes, quite controversial narrative.
Understood. So what happens next, according to this prediction?
This breakdown, the source predicts, leads to a government funding crisis, people just walking away from jobs spontaneously, decentrally, and a collapse of the current college system.
A collapse.
Yeah, it directly compares it to what happened to academics, the intellectual class, in 1923 Germany. History repeating, in their view.
Okay, but is it all doom and gloom?
No, actually. The source expresses a really strong sense of optimism for what comes after this chaos.
Like what?
It anticipates a treasury-backed dollar, a return to what it sees as a more stable asset-backed currency.
Right, a shift away from fiat currency.
Exactly. And it proposes projects it terms Trump's cities.
Trump's cities, what are those compared to?
The material compares them to the big public works programs of the 1930s Great Depression, like the CCC and WPA.
Ah, okay. So, drawing on successful old models again, large-scale projects to rebuild.
That seems to be the idea, rebuilding society in a new era, using patterns from the past.
Interesting. And connecting this to the bigger picture, does the material foresee other major shifts?
It does. It talks about a significant reverse migration.
People moving out of cities.
Potentially, yes.
Right.
Predicted to happen because of both harsh economic conditions and maybe even climatic shifts. People returning to more localized, maybe more resilient communities.
Makes sense in that context. Anything else?
And perhaps the most intriguing bit, the rise of what it calls tiny AI.
Tiny AI, as opposed to big AI, which the source views very negatively, calls it psychotic, and just another reflection of failed centralization.
Okay, so what is tiny AI?
It's described as decentralized, much more cost-effective, task-specific AI devices. Think small, focused tools, not giant, overarching intelligences.
Right, so local distributed intelligence.
Exactly. It highlights this really powerful recurring theme in the sources. A shift towards a more distributed, more resilient future, where older, maybe simpler solutions get reinvented and prioritized.
Supported by things like open source initiatives, perhaps?
The material suggests that yes, a fundamental shift away from top-down centralized control.
Right.
It's a vision of a dramatically different, maybe more self-reliant society, built from the ashes of the old system.
Wow, what a deep dive indeed. We've gone from the ancient Xi's rune representing the soul's protective, evolving journey to a really radical theory of everything, driven by this cosmic search for novelty.
Yeah, the boredom idea.
Right. And then straight into a hard, pretty unvarnished look at our potential future, viewed through the lens of historical financial collapses and this idea of a decentralized society, maybe built on tiny AI.
It's quite a sweep.
It really is. And it's undeniably clear, I think, that looking back at these genuinely old materials, this old knowledge, it really can illuminate our path forward in profound, often unexpected ways.
It absolutely can. Which, I suppose, raises an important question for you listening right now. How might understanding this cyclical nature of history, maybe, or these really deep, enduring ideas about consciousness and its drives, how might that alter your perception of the ever-present now?
Yeah.
And the choices you make day to day in this unfolding, apparently novelty-driven reality.
Exactly. Definitely something to think about. Keep those questions in mind as you navigate your own deep dive into the world around you, maybe looking for that old wisdom hiding in the new.
Well put.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.